Karolina here. And Karolina, for those who don't know her, she is an assistant professor at Karolinska Institute, and she is originally a gynecologist and obstetrician. But she has been working in kidney research for a long time now, and you are specializing in gender innovation and gender inequalities. And you have started the Gender Innovation Alliance at Karolinska Institute. So please go ahead with your talk.
So thank you very much, and thank you very much for invitation. And I think it's we can complement to each other with Peter because we share the same topics. So basically, I will try to wake you up today because I'm going to talk about the gender and sex and chronic kidney disease, and try to share with you ideas, you know, why sex and gender is important, and try to put the arguments why to integrate sex and gender, like gender dimension in the field. I try to face, you know, these challenges together in health and disease. I will describe for you the terms that basically sometimes we're mixing them, because I truly believe if we get the new knowledge, we will get the gendered innovations that could serve to all. I will go shortly after that with the sex and gender aspects in chronic kidney disease, trying to explain for you why it is important to understand from the different pathogenetic mechanisms towards potential application of novel therapeutics, and invite you to think together. Can novel therapeutics make a difference, yes or no? So we are coming now to terms, and it's very important for you to remember because every cell is sexed and every person is gendered. And what I mean by the sex, so sex is biological attributes of humans and animals, physical and physiological features, chromosomes, gene expression, hormones, and anatomy. And when we come to the gender, gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. And of course, very often in our field, we talk about the gender disparities that refer to differences in women's and men's access to health care and outcomes. And it is recognized that women encounter more barriers related to gender due to patriarchal cultures, family responsibilities, and basically also economical dependence. I just want for you, for those who are interested, this is our early stage researcher, Lea, that we recently wrote a paper describing sex factors and gender factors, linked also to cardiorenal syndrome. But here I want to stress, in addition to the sex factors that we usually talk about, the genetics, hormones, anatomy, I also want to say that we have also sex-specific factors that in our case are linked to the pregnancy situation, that basically women getting pregnant, and this is sex-specific aspects, biological aspects that we have to consider. And then we come with the gender factors, or gender-sensitive variables, is basically a link to the household, family responsibilities, profession, education, environmental exposure that Peter lifted at very much, will lift later, marital status, physical activity, health-seeking behavior, social economic status, healthcare access, and cultural practice. Why do I say that? And I basically say that because now we are facing and introducing the policies, the science policies. And I believe that policy is one driver of discovery and innovation that can enable sex and gender analysis in science and technology and making our science even more excellent. I think we have a tremendous support, not only by the symposium organized or ERADTA, where the sex and gender aspects are implemented and enhanced and advised. Basically, we also have the European Union, the call Horizon 2020, about the 3 objectives of gender equality, and where one of them is gender dimension in research and innovation content. And for those working in academia, I want to present that this is a very structural process where universities are having, the policies and collaborating with the funding agencies and peer journals, peer review journals, and I assume also with biotech and big pharma companies, basically to develop and introduce and use the methods of sex and gender analysis. And the reason why we want to do that is basically that we will have rigor, reproducibility, reproducible, inclusive, transparent research that would add value for our patients and the health in general. I think what I mean when I'm saying about the using sex and gender, we basically are getting the new knowledge or new innovations. And when we use sex and gender disaggregated statistics, we have gendered innovations that basically are also the keystone for the precision medicine. And at this stage, I know that you have a lot of the doctors here. I also want to pay your attention about the bias from the doctor side, because basically the circle between the physician, which could be man, woman, or gender diverse, and also the patient also could be the same, and also in relation to the treatment, there are, and we have to appreciate that we might have, gender stereotypes. We also have to appreciate sex characteristics, and also to look, towards treatment success in the patient based on gender norms. So as Peter started to talk about the precision medicine, I think the sex and gender also are very important modifiers of health and disease. And basically you can see in the simplified cartoon about the biological sex hormones, sex chromosomes, and basically also society impact or exposome, like lifestyle, nutritional habits, exercise, perceived stress, and smoking, that basically also puts together through different epigenetic effects how the patients are going to respond to the treatment. And basically, if we look more in the biology, we see how the disease develops, what is pathophysiology, manifestation, or response to treatment, or, for example, using more gender-sensitive variables, we could understand disease perception, help-seeking behavior, use of healthcare, decision-making, and therapeutic response. And I'm sure that everyone here in our audience agree that those things are important and complex. Are we doing well? I have to say for you that we are not doing well and we can do better. Because I truly believe that doing research right saves lives and money. And this is again simplified cartoon because we do have sex bias in preclinical studies and clinical trials, and basically including preclinical studies where we have domination of the male cells or male animals. We have also the clinical trials, phase 1, 2, 3, dosage and safety monitoring, where we have again the majority of male participants, and going later to review and approval and praxis for the safety efficacy evaluation, and also post-release monitoring, often in women is less. So, why do you think I'm saying for you this? Why should we care? And basically we should care for 4 things. The first one, explanatory power. I think that similarities and differences are important in response to treatment, and we have to think about that. The second thing, risk of harm. I think that results, we have to prove that assuming that the study results apply to everyone, and it might not be all the time the same. The third thing, the missed opportunities. If we don't see for the sex differences, we might lose the opportunity to tailor treatments differently for men and women. And finally, which is very important in our scientific field, is basically problems with reproducibility and not reporting properly the sex of the patients now reporting more. Actually, we have the problems with reproducibility. Can we do this better? Of course we can do that better because we have, the SAGE guidelines, published guidelines, and I think, I am listing here the main journals that include sex or gender in auto instructions. And now we have the leading journals in the cardiovascular field and also in cardiorenal field, where the applications of sex and gender aspects are required and actually encourage, and as well as I'm not talking about a lot of the financial support. So, are we doing good? And as an example, of course, you're all aware, using sex and gender aspects, we have a significant innovations in women cardiovascular health. I'm not going to talk about this, but it supports our suggesting that doing research right saves lives and money. And being in the field, we actually published a paper that shows, the importance of implementation and how to do that, include more women in the clinical trials. And this is simplified, showing, where to start in vitro, in animal experiments, human drug trials, phase 1 and 2, human drug trials, phase C, and post-marketing. I am saying that, also very importantly, because we believe that we are doing better. And of course, we have to give the credit, to National Institute of Health in the United States after the policy advising in 1986 to increase number of women in clinical trials, also the minorities. Unfortunately, the more things change, the more they stay the same. A study to evaluate compliance with inclusion and assessment of women in minorities in randomized controlled trials. I took that paper as an example. Even after this, 2015, the progress was very poor and basically insignificant, and further attempts should be done. I am also putting here the age in the red line, and this is a very simple thing, why I'm adding, and I think the former speaker also said about this. Because of the aging population, we're very quickly forgetting, to include more older people in our clinical trials, and this is the courtesy slide of our Brazilian collaborators that were visiting our department, really bringing up about for older adults, questioning a diagnosis of chronic kidney disease. Is it really possible that half of the population older than 70 has chronic disease? And this is what you have to answer for us doctors working in the clinic. So, why do I say that we have to look for sex differences in respect to the drug application? And I think, for those who are working with the translational research, this is a very simple summary cartoon that shows that there is differences in absorption and distribution and excretion of drugs responsible for sex differences in pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamic actions. And this is basically linked to the absorption, to distribution because of different body fat composition, cardiac output, total blood plasma, metabolism. We have the differences in the elimination and pharmacodynamics. So those are the keystones aspects that we have to consider in respect to the application of different medications, and also how sex could influence the impact. And this is also a list of the CYP enzymes that it seems to be very important, for the different drug activity. And you can see for the enzyme activity, we have quite an interesting sexual dimorphism in this respect. So this is matter. This is what we know so far. I am translational scientist, and I'm working, with the cell cultures and animals and the human vessels to understand, for example, the development of early vascular aging. And I might say for you now that each cell has sex. And the first classical paper that I introduce here from our colleagues in Italy, basically using used to use cells HUVECs, human umbilical vein endothelial cells. Basically, they show that depending on the sex of the cells, they actually react totally differently in respect to cell proliferation, migration, protein expression, and endothelial survival. So you can imagine that if you want to test something in the cells, you really have to know the cell sex. Are we doing better? Are we doing good? No, we are not doing good, and we can do better. And this is again an example from the very relatively recent paper, which really provides quite disturbing results, basically showing that they did the snapshots from 7 prominent biomaterial journals, where we're trying to assess if the authors are reporting the cell sex. And this is really very, because in isolated cells, you can see, the huge number unreported cells. And what is even more worrying, that basically if you're buying commercially available cells, they are not reported. And that was actually done, this snapshot 2021. So it's not okay, because what we are doing, we need to do translational research. We need to understand how the medication is working. And for that reason, we're trying to develop new spheroids, organoids, or organ-on-a-chip systems. And basically, if we use sex-balance systems when studying drug effects and disease mechanisms, we will progress much, much more sooner, and will increase the potential of quick application of medications. So now I come to chronic kidney disease, and I'm sure, in this audience, you meet the patients each day. And basically, this is, the white color should be the pink color. And I have put a little bit sex/gender-related factors for CKD. And if you look for prevalence and progression, diagnosis, and management, of course, we have the sex differences. We have the sex differences for CKD prevalence, for females 3 to 5 stage, and for the males, we have CKD from 1 to 5. We know that men have the increase, they have faster loss of kidney function, and they're more likely to die due to CKD. And of course, we have in the males increased prevalence of albuminuria, and thus therefore we have, diagnosed CKD stages 1 and 2. Of course, we have all issues for the eGFR calculations for the females linked to lower mean body surface area. If we look further, we know that the females develop more anemia. They, under diagnosis, they are getting more erythropoietin. We all the time discussing about the reduced applications of EV fistula. It's not clear, is it that smaller vessels or not, how the woman decides, cosmetic reasons. We have increased poor allograft survival, particularly in the younger patients, and it's not clear whether this is estrogen driver. I also want to say that females have more adverse effects, and I a little bit explain probably because why. And there is a difference, but what I also want to stress here, also there are very important differences for the gender and sex the sensitive factors. And if we look, for the males, you're all aware they have more comorbidity, they live more unhealthy lifestyle, but they are more, referred to the nephrology specialists, they are more frequently testing for albuminuria, more men treated as outpatients in CKD clinics, and medical doctors looks like they are really paying more attention to the men's symptoms. And if we look for the females, I know that we have, you're all aware, we still have the supportive data about the delayed treatment. Even women have the better adherence to medications. We have the problems and barriers for kidney transplantation waiting lists. And of course, women prefer the conservative care, particularly in the older age. This is some study from our Swedish colleagues that looked for the sex differences in the recognition, monitoring, and management of chronic kidney disease in healthcare observational cohort, where they looked, for adults assessing healthcare in Sweden, and they had more than 200,000 persons at first, even detected eGFR below 60, and they looked for indicators of the CKD care in the following 18 months, and their study outcomes where they provide the recognition of CKD, issuing the CKD diagnosis, remeasuring of creatinine, measurement of albuminuria, visiting nephrologist, and of course provision of RASI and provision of statins. And conclusion is really worrying, because in all these cases, women were the result that they had a profound, decrease in the detection, recognition, monitoring, referrals, and management of CKD, that the sex differences could not be explained by the differences in comorbidity. So how we're doing with the clinical trials in this field? And I just got, the summary from the randomized clinical trials of adults receiving maintenance dialysis. This is meta-epidemiological study, including more than 500 randomized trials. And the message here is also worrying. First of all, you see the numbers, how many patients are included, and particularly in respect to the females. And the conclusion here is that sex and gender are inconsistently reported in maintenance dialysis trials and often do not include either in the study design or analysis. So what I said for you, doing research right saves lives and money, and we need to do better. And this paper also put, recommendations how we can improve, the inclusion of the women in the clinical trials. So real-world example for CKD, why I'm saying why we need to look for the CKD and what it is, why it is important. And I will give some of you physiological and pathophysiological backgrounds. And for me, also obstetrician gynecologist, is very important women reproductive health. And you see here, and we all appreciate, that basically the woman reproductive health from the intrauterine environment towards menopause basically is a risk as a lifelong process. And I truly believe that is the same for CKD disease. And this is basically starts, very early, and when you have the exposure of different environmental factors and lifestyle factors, it forms, women's cardiorenal health. And as example, I'm very pleased we had my PhD student from Cork University, Dr. Peter Barrett. So basically what we did, and we had the fortune to do, we had used the data from the pregnancy register with more than 4 million deliveries and link, to the Swedish renal register. And my message here is very simple, that history of adverse pregnancy outcomes, including preeclampsia, preterm delivery, gestational diabetes, even stillbirth, is associated with higher risk of long-term CKD. Basically, women with history of preeclampsia are at increased risk of long-term CKD, particularly linked to the hypertensive and diabetic forms of CKD, and the risk of end-stage kidney disease is highest among women who experience preeclampsia. So here I address for you, think about the female, think about her reproductive health, because basically we have to optimize the long-term systemic monitoring and also to consider for the interventions potential window of therapy. And of course, when we talk about the woman, we all the time think about the hormonal environment. And I also want to stress, of course, we know that estrogens are renal protective. Basically, what is happening, that chronic kidney disease might not only trigger early onset of menopause owing to its accelerated aging effects, but can also cause alterations in reproductive hormones, which frequently lead to amenorrhea and functional menopause. And this pseudomenopause is often reversible if we get the kidney transplantation, but it's not in the all women, and menses are not restored, and they enter physiological menopause. And of course, the all patients suffers, the symptoms from the kidney disease, but if woman is in the menopause, she has a lot of the vasomotor symptoms, which really not making her life very high quality. And according to that, we still, advise that they could use the estrogen, but the concentration should be reduced to 50 to 70%. And I think this is also linked to the evidence where we have to apply and to whom, considering therapeutical window, the risk for the cancer, risk for the thromboembolic complications, etc. So this is important to consider. Now we talk so many drugs, that are linked to diabetes. And this is very simple for you to know that there is a dramatical 6 differences in energy metabolism. And this is encompass energy partitioning, the mass and biology of white adipose tissue, brown adipose tissue, and insulin sensitivity. And basically it has the effects on the glucose, lipid, protein homeostasis during fasting, rest, and starvation. And here we have the comparison of these really metabolically active organs and the activities that basically are totally different between females and males. And together, genetic sex development programming that is already starts in the uterine by testosterone and pubertal sex hormones may define sex-specific biological systems that produce sex differences in energy homeostasis, metabolic disease, and basically ensure what kind of responses we have to anti-diabetic and anti-obesity drugs. The same also values that we learned from the animal experiments. Basically, there are the sexual dimorphism in renal transporters, assessment that gives for us understanding of the assessment, functional consequences. There are sex differences in the abundance of kidney solute and electrolyte transporters, renal tubular organization and operation. And basically, this is also ensures the sex-specific medicine or mechanisms of sodium, potassium, acid base, and volume physiology that has the effects on the therapeutic options. I could not resist not to show this paper because we talk about that, and this is a very recent paper which was published in the Science Translational Medicine. And basically, they're showing sex differences in kidney metabolism may reflect sex-dependent outcomes in human diabetic kidney disease. And to make story short, it was clearly shown using human proximal tubular cells, both females and males, that males have greater cell surface in mitochondria area. The DHT-treated male PTSEs have higher glycolysis, oxygen consumption, maximal respiratory capacity, and reserve capacity. And what is more interesting after that, when they look for TCA metabolites, they showed that the males showed the increased concentrations of citrate, aspartate, and malate, and where this was increased in the pyruvate. And these findings also were validated in the human participants, particularly when they show, this increased TCA cycle metabolized in CKD. And in males, it was positively associated with male sex, diabetes mellitus, and all-cause mortality. So here we know that there is metabolism which differs between male and female kidney cells. And I think you agree with me that doing research right saves lives and money. As Peter said, chronic kidney disease is early vascular aging phenotype. And we are very interested in our lab, and this is a simplified cartoon to understand for you that the inflammation, ROS, and DNA damage is associated with the induction of the senescence and a senescence-associated secretory phenotype, which could be linked to the activation and regulation of vascular calcification, where we have the disbalance between the calcification inducers and calcification inhibitors. And in this case, I want to stress that there are emerging new therapies, and this was actually very nicely summarized by my colleague Thomas Ebert, that is going to give a talk after me. But for example, xenotherapeutics are really very attractive, and there are some studies that showing that, particularly in diabetic nephropathy, the application of senolytics reduces senescence burden in diabetic nephropathy patients. However, even if this therapy is attractive, a lot of things needs to be done because we don't know anything about the sex differences. And just for example, to say for you, we know that there are sexual dimorphism in the biological aging, and the other studies showing in the human studies where we have sex differences in the genetic factors of biological aging, mitochondrial link mechanisms, cellular senescence, proteostasis, telomeres, epigenetics, inflammation, immunological markers, nutrient sensing, and metabolism and freight. So this is a very complex cartoon, but you've heard today so many things about the new medications. So this is the summary of mainly dominant mechanisms that are occurring in the kidney disease problems. And you can see they are linked to the hormonal environment, hemodynamics, adiponectins, oxidative and substrate stress metabolism, water electrolyte homeostasis and channels. And of course, we're also not talking about the gender domain constructs or concomitant risk factors. And you can see here that those pathways that marked in the red pillars totally different, and differs between females and males. And because of that, the potential therapeutic strategies could be also adapted in relation to the patient's or participant's sex. And this is still important to understand for the future. In line that I want to say that we all know that women also experience more adverse drug reactions. This is the study, I think, from also our collaborative studies for the Swedish colleagues, where they look for the patient with CKD stages 3 to 5. And basically, women were between 17% in United States and 52% in Sweden, more likely to receive potentially inappropriate nephrotoxic medications versus men matched for age, comorbidities, and disease recognition in the health system. And of course, the under-recognized sex differences in pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics are very important. We also know that there are sex-related differences in the drug efficiency, and this is related to RAS because it's modulated by sex hormones. And we know that efficacy of RAS inhibitors is reduced in female. We heard very lot of those drugs today, and it was not an easy task for me, for you to do the summary, but what I can tell for GLP-1 receptor agonist. So if we look for adverse effects, we have more prominent weight loss in females and more prominent gastrointestinal adverse effects in females. However, we have similar reduction in cardiovascular risk factors between sexes, similar risk of hypoglycemia between sexes, and similar reduction in glycated hemoglobin levels between the sexes. And this is summary for those who are interested. If we look for SGLT2 inhibitors, it seems that when looking for the sex differences, it is a greater benefits in men. However, women have great adverse side effects linked to the urinary tract infections, genital infections, and diabetic ketoacidosis. So can we do better, and what is about? I am soon finishing, and I think this is extremely important as you are nephrologist, and I really want to share very important paper by your colleagues. That was interview, semi-structured interview conducted to look and identify the barriers for care for women. And this includes less social security, limited literacy, entrenched discrimination, vulnerability, financial and transport barrier. And they basically also come with the suggestions to address gender disparity, empowerment in decision-making, accountability, access to clinic and communication, patient awareness and education, unconscious bias in clinicians, and financial support. So how do I see the future? I see it very simple together with you. I truly believe that all translational research should include both sex as biological variable and gender-sensitive variable. And I think the progress that we will have, we can have this together due to collaborative efforts among researchers, clinicians, biotech and pharma companies, patients and policymakers. I also listed here the part of the personalized treatment where I truly believe interdisciplinary collaboration that you talked before is a crucial stone in the success, as well as Peter is going to talk about the global implications, because we really have to think globally and to act locally. And of course, this is a lot of new insights that we have to consider. To sum up, I think I try to present for you today few important messages here, that males, more rapid rate of progression, testosterone might be deleterious, female have higher prevalence of CKD stage 3 to 5, males higher prevalence CKD stages 1-5 due to their greater prevalence of albuminuria. I told for you that basically female have increased risk because of the history of hypertensive pregnancy complications. I also showed for you or included that women receive fever, kidney transplantation, IV, and have the potential dialysis overdose. Women less aware of their condition, screening and diagnosed with CKD and referred to nephrologists, and are more likely to experience adverse drug reactions. And women may also experience more barriers to kidney transplantation waiting list, but have better survival than men after transplantation. I truly believe that in our collaborative work, we have to appreciate the hormonal and genetic factors that play an important role. I invite you to be more gender sensitive. I think, as we heard from the previous, it is extremely important to appreciate also social economical differences, and those I need more assessment. And this will help for us to improve the precision medicine and a work in progress. So at this stage, sitting here, I invite you to use gender lens, be gender sensitive, spread the word, push boundaries, be the leader, other follows. Gender dimension, to my understanding, adds value for innovation in healthcare and in the treatment of CKD patients. And I truly believe that one day the world will thank you. With that, I want also to thank my team and my boss, Peter Stenwinkel. And at the end, I want to answer the question, can gender sex aspects and CKD progression, can novel therapeutics make a difference? I answer yes, they can, they do, and they will. Thank you for your attention.